Let's all welcome Ms. Smriti Kesarwani, who's a user experience expert with almost a decade and more of an experience in design strategy, interaction design, and user research and UCT processes. She's passionate about designing digital solutions with a very strong focus on humanizing technology. So, like we had a session on design thinking since morning from the workshop. So Smriti is going to give a good end to the entire process by giving a glimpse on what is the significance of what we have learned in the morning and what is the significance of design process entirely, and particularly in business, which IIMA is more concerned with. Smriti has worked with design agencies and product-based companies in the roles of UX designer and AMP consultant. Currently, she's working as a senior UX consultant with OutSystems based in Singapore. I hear that she's going to shift to Germany soon, but with the same company, which is a good thing. And they have been helping the enterprise customers ranging from fintech, telecom, aviation, consumer goods, services sectors to create digital solutions for B2B, B2C, and B2E. She has a master's degree in cognitive science and is a certified UX professional by NNG and AMP HFI. So I welcome you, Smriti, on board, and please take it from here. And we are very excited to hear your thoughts on it. Please.
Thank you, Richa. You're too generous with your words. Am I audible properly? Should I speak loud or it's all right?
Yeah, I think it's good enough.
All right. Okay, cool. Thank you so much for giving me the floor, and I welcome all the participants. It's sad that we are not in one room, but I think this is the new normal and we are all everywhere and still connected. So I welcome you all and thank you for taking out time for this session. So Rich already took away my first slide, so I'm not going to talk about myself. Thank you. I don't like to do that. But I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm Smriti, and as Richa mentioned, I am working currently with OutSystems. And I'm a mother. I have 2 kids. And in free time, whenever I get some, I like to read, and I basically just like to talk to people and observe the small, banal things that happens in their life, and that is what I really do. So today's session, this is, I believe, would be a continuation of the workshop that maybe some of you participated earlier in the day about design thinking. So I am not going to talk more about design thinking, which I believe you've already heard a lot. So I'm just trying to focus more on the application and show you some of the examples where I use design thinking as a process to come up with the solution for the challenges that were thrown at me and my team. So the agenda is basically very short. What is UX? Because I think it's a good to start. You can't talk about design thinking or an application about design thinking without talking about UX. So I'll keep it very short. What is user experience and how it brings value to the business? And then a major part of this talk would be focusing on the case studies. We will see how design thinking had added value to the outcome. So I usually start my presentation with some story. And here I have another story today, which is the airport story. For people who have heard the story before, sorry to repeat it, but I think you would enjoy it. So some years ago, the airlines company, one airport, they noticed that the elderly travelers, they were spending a lot of time in the toilet, and so much that they were almost missing their flights. So consequently, they decided to redesign the facility. And the immediate thought that came to their mind was, okay, let's build more toilets, because they understood that holding your most primordial needs get harder as you age. So the solution came, getting more toilets on the way to the gates so that the elderly wouldn't need to spend much time on their way and they will not miss their flights. But unfortunately, this did not solve their problem. And the elderly were still missing their flights. They were not able to reach the gate on time. So then the airport authorities decided, let's hire a design consultancy so that they can rethink at the solution and maybe redesign the space so that they can solve the problem. So this is what happened. And the consultancy, well, the first thing that they did was to try to understand the problem. They did some user research to understand what exactly is the problem and why the previous solution was not working. So you guys ready for the outcome, what they found as the research? Okay, I'm not gonna wait for a response, but I'm gonna just say. So they found out that there was the reason why elderly kept going to the toilet had nothing to do with the nature's call, but the fact that they had to listen to the loudspeaker announcement about the flights, gates, and schedules, which they were not able to do it at any other place other than the toilet, because everywhere else it was so noisy, they couldn't listen. Hence, they were trying to find a quiet corner to just listen to the announcement. So what turned out is like what could have been a very simple solution, but it took a long time to investigate and find the right solution, just because the authorities didn't think about identifying the problem, talking to the users, understanding what their needs are, and just jumping straight away for the solution. And this is what happens quite often when we are very pressed for go lives, we are thrown with the very tight deadlines that we have to come up with a solution that would work well, that we can sell, that the users would use. But in all these noise, we tend to forget that we first have to understand what is the problem and then come up with the solution. And this is quite an amazing story for that. So here it is that lack of UX design is what sometimes has bad consequences. But there are techniques. It's not magic. It's not a genius that you come up with some good design. So there is a process, and design thinking is one such process. It's a very effective process to create an intuitive product or application, whatever you're talking about. Lately, UX is getting a lot of traction. It's getting a lot of popularity for a lot of reasons. But I think one major reason is because people have started to understand why it is important. They have started to see the merit in it. And that's why they are not just for B2C application, business to consumer application, but also for a lot of different digital, even in physical, like the physical products, they are also utilizing this design thinking approach or user-centered design approach to come up with the solution. I have a video here, which I think explains the process very well. It's a short 4-5 minutes video. So I would like you all to listen to it and understand what the user experience means and why it is important. And this will also be a good give us a good context for our further discussion. So I'm going to play and just will pause again so that to confirm that you all can hear the sound. Is the sound coming?
Yes,
was there a sound?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, cool.
What the heck is UX design? And what does a UX designer actually do? These are difficult questions to answer because if you ask 5 different people, you're going to get 5 different answers. In this talk, I'm not only going to explain what UX design is, but also why I believe you should find out more about it, regardless of your job. UX, obviously, stands for user experience. And when we say user experience, we're referring to the what, when, where, why, and how someone uses a product. as well as who that person is. So, what, when, where, why, how and who, these cover the user experience of a product, which is pretty much everything that affects the user's interaction with that product. So as you can imagine, a UX designer, which is someone who designs these interactions, is constantly asking a ton of questions. If you're someone who naturally questions things, UX design could be a great career for you, because it's the answers to these questions that shape a product's design. Of course, it's not all about the user's needs. UX designers need to take into account a business's needs as well. It's no use having a product that people love if it doesn't help a business achieve its goals. That's not a product, that's a side project. A UX designer aims for that sweet spot where user needs and business needs overlap. So, how do they do this other than by asking a lot of questions? Well, a UX designer follows what's called a user-centered design process. We use a set of tools and techniques to take the user's needs into account at every stage of the product's lifecycle. I'm going to repeat that because it's a bit of a mouthful when you hear it for the first time. A user-centered design process takes the user's needs into account at every stage of the product lifecycle. I say product because these techniques apply to web apps, mobile apps, desktop apps, or even physical products. Okay, so that's all well and good, but why should you care? I'm going to give you 4 reasons why I believe this stuff matters so much. And this list doesn't include the obvious one, which is the fact that paying attention to UX results in you building a product that's awesome instead of one that people hate using. Hopefully that's a given. The reasons why I think you should learn more about UX are: number 1, you're probably doing some of this already. One thing I've learned is that when you understand how it is that you do what you do, you become infinitely better at it. Like the fable about the centipede who, when asked how it was that he walked, couldn't give an answer, but when he picked himself up and examined and flexed each of his 100 legs, he danced the most beautiful dance in the world. Here's number 2. User-centered design is a process, which means it's practically scientific. It's like taking the scientific method, using analysis and measurement, and applying it to humans and their behaviour. And that's fascinating to me, this notion that designers are artistic geniuses with a penchant for cutting off their own ear. It's nonsense. This is a science, well, a quasi-science. Which leads me to the 3rd reason that UX matters. It's not that hard, especially for people who are already technically inclined. I don't want to go putting myself out of a job here, but you know what? This stuff is not rocket surgery, to borrow from Steve Krug. Anyone can learn the basics of user testing and card sorting and writing scenarios and creating wireframes. It's actually very straightforward, which is a good segue to the 4th reason you should care about UX. And that's that it's fun. This stuff is fascinating. A career as a UX designer is interesting, it's challenging, it's rewarding, it pays well, and there's a very low barrier to entry. A lot of people feel uncomfortable calling themselves a designer because they're no good at choosing a typeface or a colour palette. Get over it. UX design is the design behind the visuals. Visual design is just one small part of it. It's an important part, but some of the best UX designers I know actually aren't that great at visual design, but they're really good at those other areas that are so important. And that's pretty much it. So while you might hear terms like information architect, user interface designer, interaction designer, or usability specialist, these can all be considered UX professionals. Now they might specialize in marketing or technology, or maybe they come from a user research, social media, or even customer support background. Either way, they're all asking a ton of questions and following a quasi-scientific process to do the design behind the visuals. And they're having a blast doing it. So that's what I'd like to leave you with. That if this stuff interests you, you may very well be well placed to have a promising career as a UX designer. Thanks for listening. My name's Matt, and I've just launched a site called uxmastery.com where I blog about UX.
Okay. Hope everybody is awake and not fell asleep listening to this video. So this is from Matthew. He's an amazing UX consultant. And so what they talked about here is a very cool point of view of what UX design is, why it is important, and why anybody can be a UX designer. You don't have to have a fancy degree or a lot of training. It's just based. The first thing you need to know is that there is a curiosity, there is a drive for making products better, asking questions like why we are doing something and why it need to be done like that. So I think these are a few of the aptitude. If you have that, and you can be a UX designer. That's how I started a few years back, and I'm loving it, if I can borrow the line from McDonald's. So I hope it gave you good understanding of what user experience and what user experience design is. And taking that, and I will move ahead with the next section of the presentation, which is business value of user experience, which is again very important to understand, because if you are not able to sell UX to the stakeholders, to your own people in your company, in your college, wherever you are, it's hard to practice it. So we see here a few points why it is an integral part, especially if you are working in a digital space. I come from a digital background, so I can talk mostly about digital space. And I have divided into two sections. The first is B2C, which is like a business to consumers applications, like all your Facebook, Zoom, Google applications, your TikTok, and all these. So these all are business to consumer application. And the first value it brings is in terms of customer acquisition. So to understand this term, a lot of companies pay a lot of money. They invest in acquiring new customers. And if the application is not user-friendly, if it is not intuitive, then it would be very hard to onboard customers and keep them hooked on the application. So if the user experience is great, it's delightful, it is providing value to the users, they are going to use the application, and hence the customer acquisition becomes very easy. Also, it gives a competitive advantage. You must have seen a lot of applications coming and dying in no span of time, just because they didn't have an edge over their competitor. So if an application has an edge, has good user experience, then the customer would use it. The second business benefit is the customer retention. So again, let me bring to the point that companies, especially if it's like, for example, e-commerce side, they spend a lot of money in acquiring the customer. For example, you would get a sign up bonus, make your first purchase and you would get some discounts, refer a friend and you would get some discounts. So all these investments, all these ideas that the company have is basically to have customer retention. So if the application is intuitive, I've used the word beautiful. However, I don't like to use the word beautiful in terms of user experience a lot. But if the application is intuitive, and then people would want to use it, and more importantly, keep using it, because they will come back to it again and again, because it provides value to them. It solves some of their problem, and that is very important. The third point is lower support cost. You might not be able to relate to it immediately, but understand it in this way. If the application is designed very poorly, then, and I can think of so many printers in my mind, like the printers are designed so poorly that would keep calling the customer care, and then the company would need to invest in hiring people to support the users when they are stuck. So if the application is designed well, then it also reduces the training costs. There wouldn't be any documentation required. Imagine if the application is so simple that you doesn't need a product is so simple that it doesn't need a manual. Then the company can take away the cost of printing a manual because it's just not needed. So having a good intuitive user experience also lowers the support cost. Just interrupt me, stop me if anybody has any thought. I know there is a Q&A section afterwards, but in case if there is some cool idea that came in your mind while we were discussing, just stop me. I'm more than happy to take questions in between. The second part is for B2E. B2E means business to enterprise. So all your intranet applications, so your university website, or if you're working in a corporate, so their internal application, your HR, payroll, leave application, all this where you submit your leave. So all these enterprise application is called B2E. And also there are B2B, which means business to business applications. So all these also have massive benefits if there are proper designed application. The first thing is increased productivity. So if it is a B2B or B2E, then they generally don't think about customer acquisition, because if you're a student, then you have no choice. You have to use your own universities or college website. So there is nothing about acquisition. But there's a cost, or there is a very important point, which is productivity. So imagine a scenario. If you're a student and you have to submit your, I don't know, like registration for your degree. And if the form is very complex and it takes 20 minutes of your time, then that 20 minutes is kind of a wastage if that application was simple and you could fill up the form in 5 minutes. So every student is spending 20 minutes, extra 15 minutes for that application. That is what is decreasing productivity. So this is where increased productivity is important for B2E or B2B application. The fifth point is reduced development time. And this is again very important if you are building an application, because if the design is done right in the first go, then of course you don't have to go back and redo it again. So it will avoid any future headaches, any obstacles, any user adoption issues if the application has. So, and in fact, there was a study done by IEEE. They found that for any development work, the developers are approximately spending 25% of their time just debugging or fixing a broken application. So imagine if the application is designed well, if all the user research and the usability testing and everything is done properly, then this all can be mitigated. And it is again something that the business can save, and there is an increase in the overall revenue. And this is something I can also vouch for personally. So for all the projects where the UX team is not involved, generally the development time increases. There is less customer satisfaction. There is a lower chances that the customer would still be on the OutSystems platform, because they don't see the value. So if there is just a UX team who is doing a proper design work, they are doing research, they are doing user assessment, usability testing, it all adds up in a way that the development time is reduced a lot. Any question before I move on to the next section, because now we are going to go in the case studies.
I think for the participants, they can type in their questions in the Q&A in the end, so they won't be able to talk during the live session.
Okay,
we can
okay.
take that up in the end. We can
all
take
right.
that.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I will talk about 3 case studies. The first one I have elaborated more just to explain how the design thinking process was used. So the first one, well, I cannot, unfortunately, I cannot take the name because of the NDA, but I can give you a little background. So this is for an energy company in Malaysia. So they are the primary energy provider in one of the Malaysian's biggest state, which is Sarawak, and it has a population close to 3 million, and they have a huge user base, and it's expanding. It's about so when I worked on it, it was about 6,800,000 account they have, and also to support all these accounts, they had about 5,000 internal employees. So they are like, if for Indian context, think about Tata or Reliance Energy. So they were that big into the energy section. And the challenge that they were facing was mostly that it was all paper-based. So think of a scenario when somebody, domestic or commercial user, when they have to get a new connection or need to have a maintenance or raise an issue if there was some problem with their connection. So for everything, it was paper-based, and it posed a lot of problem for them, like high maintenance cost. They had to maintain a lot of archival system. So huge space they had to acquire just to maintain all the project papers. And their response time was very high, because whenever there was a grievance raised, they had to go back, look at the logs and everything. It was not at all digital. So it was a big challenge for them. And just to maintain all this paper-based process, they had to maintain a huge workforce that could be either diverted into some productive work, or they didn't have to hire so many people. So all these challenges were there, and they hired us to rethink and provide them with a digital transformation. And I actually clicked this picture while I was there, because I was curious how their paper-based systems look like. And this is actually one of the many folders, paper-based folders that they had for a single project. So their archival system was like it was like a big library. So to solve the problem, my team, we started with this design thinking approach, which I believe a lot of you were talking about in the workshop earlier. So it is basically same, three major pillars: understand, explore, and materialize. You understand the problem, you explore the potential solution, and then you materialize the solution that works well with the users. So this was the approach taken. And the first point, empathize, because it is important to understand the user, who's the user. So it's like understand the people, what they do, what are their problems, what kind of context they are working in, both the end customer and also the internal employees, because they were also going to use the application. So all these questions, like who are the users, what matters to this person, how does a particular feature help for them, help them to solve the problem. So all these things come across in the empathize section. And we did workshop with the users. So they did a lot of brainstorming, writing things on the post-it notes and sticking to the wall to just surface all the problems that they were facing. And then further, we did a lot of empathy maps to understand the user base. After this, did a lot of define, which is basically framing the right problem, because if you have the right problem, then only you can create the right solution. So synthesizing all the information gathered in the first step to determine what would be the meaningful and actionable problem statement. It actually serves, like, if you can call it like a North Star or Pole Star, like, this is where we are heading. These are the goals. These are the metrics that we should be looking at once the application is live, to see whether it has really solved the problems and all. So this was more like a second step, define step, where we define the problem statement for the users. And I generally use, so this is an example I quite often use this, the voting system, where because if there are a lot of stakeholders, the project team is huge, then it happens quite often that we lose the focus and we don't know which is the high priority feature or high priority need that we need to solve. So voting system is pretty good. And what you see, this yellow circle is like everybody gets a vote. And actually for this one, we gave 2 votes. Everybody can go and point out, okay, this for me is really important and this is for me the high priority. And it takes away a lot of bureaucracies out. Everybody gets 2 votes, so it's a pure democracy. No a project sponsor or a bigger stakeholder is no different than a user who is going to work on the application day in and out. So it's a very democratic system. So after this was the ideate phase. It's actually a time where you generate all the possible ideas. I don't have to restrict on what could be the potential solution. So it's not about coming up with the right idea, but it's more about generating the broadest range of possibilities. So you can diverge into different teams, just start to brainstorm what could be the potential ideas. And this is an example I'm showing of a mind map that we did for the application. And after this ideate phase, we start to combine all our ideas together to see what could be the potential solution. And generally, the different methods of doing this step is you can do a competitive analysis, brainstorming with the team, sketching some mind maps or storyboarding. So there are a plethora of techniques to ideate. It just depends on which kind of method works for you, what is the requirement of the project. So you can employ different kind of methods. After ideate, we did a prototype, and this is that I quite often use Sketch as a tool to prototype, but there are a lot of tools available in the market. You can use Balsamic, you can even use PowerPoint or use pen and paper, old school way. So you can use a lot of different tools to prototype. And it's kind of a first tangible representation of the idea of any possible solution that you can have. And in early stages, we try to keep it very low fidelity, low resolution, because if you have to fail, you should fail quickly and cheaply. You don't want to spend a lot of time in this phase to beautify it, doing a pixel perfect, aligning everything, using the right drop box or a radio button. So all those things are important, but at this stage, it's more important to have something, a tangible representation of the idea of the solution, like how the application would look like, and get as many quick prototyping, because you don't want to get stuck with single idea. So for tools, you can use Sketch. Nowadays, there is Figma. Some people still use Photoshop, which is good, but I think it's quite heavy and it kind of slows down the process. So yeah, or just stick to pen and paper. So after this prototyping stage, this crucial testing stage, and testing is basically to get some feedback on the prototypes created. And this is again an opportunity to further empathize with the user, understand them, what you're designing for, and also they give you feedback. By this time, COVID had already hit, so we couldn't do it in person. So we did it on Zoom. And it was a bit challenging in the beginning because it's hard to usability testing is a lot more where not just what the user is speaking, but also how their body language is, the subtle change in the gesture and all that is really important, which is kind of lost in the remote, but that was the best we could do. So we did some testing, remote usability testing. It was facilitated there in Malaysia by by their team, and I was here in Singapore, and we entered a Zoom call. but it was pretty good actually in the end. So some great results, cool insights, and then again another round of iteration, trying to remove as many problems we surfaced in the usability testing, and then had the final round of high fidelity mockups, which looks more or less like how the actual application would be. So this was the entire process from understanding understanding the problem to coming up with a potential solution. And this is usually the deliverable or the outcome of the design team. So after this project, some key wins. First of all, go live in 5 months, which was quite massive. And it also was possible because it was on OutSystems platform, which is a low code platform and things you can build very fast. So there was a go live in 5 months for 2 fully integrated digital application. One was for the customers, the end users, and the other one for back office. And the third point is actually the metrics that we received later. This project was done in the beginning of, I think, 2020. So there was about 75% reduction in the SLA. So the back office people were able to respond to the queries and the customer grievance very quickly. And then there was a huge reduction in the work return call time. And we were able to digitize about 80% of their operation. Some of the features are still paper-based, also because there was lack of, for example, they needed the customers to submit huge engineering drawings, which is like massive printouts. And there was no way they were able to do it on the digital basis. So features like this, about small features, were still on paper-based, but at least 80% of their operations was digitized. And the final and most important for me was happy users, because they were, I didn't get a chance to speak with the end users after this product, after this application. But I spoke with the back office people, and they were quite happy. Their everyday task had reduced a lot. So that was for me a major key win. So this is the case study 1, which was more detailed. The next case study is for an Australian cooperative company. So this is for what they did was basically providing solution to small scale motor companies to provide them with the equipments, with the business of auto repair. And this was a cooperative in western part of the Australia. What they wanted was a field application to be used by sales representative. There were about 600 plus representative in Australia. And the idea was they wanted to generate more business and also increase the revenue. So they already had an application, but it was very heavy, and the sales rep couldn't use it on the go. So they were using tablets or iPads, and the application that they were using was so huge that it wouldn't load up. So they were always taking paper printouts before going and meeting the customer, because they were not able to capture some information on the real time. So again, beginning with the design thinking approach. So the same process, similar process, I would say, to understand the context, to understand what are the unattended user needs, and to see what is stopping the users to adopt the existing solution, because they already had an application, but nobody was using it. Okay, not nobody, but at least very few people were using the application. So the result was, well, first of all, efficient and intuitive application that solved their everyday problems. The second result, which for me was a very huge improvement, was the sales rep were able to save about 1.5 hours every day from their 8-hour work because of this application. And this is a huge win, because imagine 600 plus people, and everybody can save 1 hour of their work life every day, five days a week, 5 hours save, which is a huge improvement. And then the other improvement was with the existing app, with the previous application, they had to spend a lot of time for user training. So because it was not at all intuitive, a lot of bugs, the information architecture was quite broken. People were not able to understand it. When they had to navigate from one customer detail to another, they were kind of lost in the application. And because of all these complexities, the company had to spend employee training. Then their new sales rep joined. They had to go to a long onboarding process, which was reduced after this application. And within few hours, so from 3 to 4 days, it was just few hours just to understand how to use this application. So here I have before and after picture. So this is what the application looked before. And we did so what I'm showing you is kind of a dashboard, which was, well, it was a big success with the sales rep, because for all these numbers that they can just see immediately, they had to run reports, they had to run BI, the business reports, just to get these numbers. And they were quite happy with the output. All right. I have another case study, and this is the last one. I won't bore you more. This is for a Japanese motor company. And this for me was a very, very important project because it came with a lot of challenge. So the first challenge for them was, first of all, this was an 18-year-old system. And it was a research and development system that they were using for, so whenever they had to come up with a new car concept, they used this application to order all the motor parts that they needed for the new concept vehicle. So this is where they had a master list of all the car parts and how each part functions, what is the way to service those car parts, in which where they can source, who are the vendors, how long it takes, what is the material. So everything about, so from the huge engine to see even a single screw or nut bolt, I don't know what all they had, but everything was maintained in this application. And so few things about I learned, I don't want to generalize, but the first challenge I faced, of course, apart from language block, the thing is that they were so polite that they didn't want to talk any negative thing about the application. So user research was very difficult in the beginning, because everybody was talking good things. Yeah, everything is working fine, this and that, but the numbers were not representing. They were having a lot of efficiency issue because of this application, but they were not surfacing it. So that was the biggest challenge. So what we did was, first of all, conducted research about the current process, and just sat with them and asked them to show how they use the application, what is their day-to-day operation, and how are they struggling with the application, just because they were not very vocal about it. So there was a lot of time spent on user research to understand the actual process and understanding the pain points. Then we designed something, tested it with them. So it just happened that there were multiple rounds of redesign for this particular application. because also the users were a bit resistant for the change. So they were not very comfortable changing their operations. So there was a huge resistance there, just to make them understand that how by simple changes in the application, we can make their lives easier, it will become more efficient. So it had to undergo a lot of iteration. And then after that, the result, they had the fully digital application. And I think here the biggest win for me was they were able to appreciate the process. They were able to understand the UX approach and saw how it brings in the value. And they were very happy to adopt this process. So earlier there was a huge block. They were not very open to adopt this UX process. But after seeing the benefits, they were quite happy to not just with the output, that was of course important, but also they were onboarded with the UX process, and that for me was a major win with them, because they were they decided that they need to dedicate a UX team for all their future project, because it will bring good business benefits. So I have some pictures of before. So this is what the application looked like before. A lot of redaction, because they were not ready to share a lot of information. So, but yeah, so after this, the application became changed. Of course, the visuals are. This is an 18-year-old application, so it looked like this, but not just with the visual, but I think there was a huge change in overall enhancing their business operation. So yeah, I would like to conclude with this one, which is well, user experience is, that's what people keep thinking about, that user experience is just making the interface pretty. I mean, that is also one part of it. But it's very important to understand that if there is a very poor process or poor user experience, then it would lead to adoption issues. Users will not use the application. They will not be engaged with the application. There'll be a lot of loss in the sales. Company would need to spend a lot of time in training the employees or retaining the customers. And all of this, or at least most of it, can be sorted out if we just follow a proper user-centered design approach. Design thinking process is one such as them. There are different ways. There are lean UX. There is even agile also follows. So you can still follow user-centered design approach if the company is working on agile approach. So by doing this, a lot of issues can be sorted out. And that was my time. And thank you for listening to me. Any questions or thoughts you have? I think now it's a good time.
I would request the participants to put their questions in the Q&A box where we can take that up. Well, by the time we wait for the questions, I have one. So regarding your case study 3, there was this observation yesterday. I don't know, even during our panel discussion, this was the same thing that we were talking about, that how to lead to a behavior change. So we were talking about behavioral science and, framing the choice architecture as such, so that, it leads to behavior change. So there's a fair amount of overlap between design thinking process and the aims of the process, as well as what we do as behavioral scientists by framing the choice architecture better so that it leads to a desired goal. So here in your case study 3, I want to specifically know that since you had a reluctant team, I would say in the beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
When they were all talking about good things of for the company. So how did you actually
onboard them to the UX process?
So in the beginning, we were asking questions. So most of the time when you ask employees what is wrong with the application that you're using, they are, well, at least in my experience, they're very vocal, but here it was not. So we had to sit with them and just observe what they're doing and be very keen on how different workaround methods that they were using. For example, so the table that I'm showing you, this table, if you can follow my mouse, they had no way. So all the tables were about like 1,000 row items, and there was no way for them to mark which row item that they were on. And they couldn't complete one sheet in one go. So they had to take a break and all that. So they were always writing the row number in a paper and keeping it so that one next time when they come, they can go back to this row. So for all these simple things, what it was very insightful to see and observe them what they're doing. And because you cannot expect the user to learn to remember a lot of things, and these small workarounds, if you notice and then incorporate in the design so that it becomes more intuitive. When they saw this feature in the application, they were very happy. And then they say, yes, yes, we needed it. So there were many instances where just by looking at what issues they're facing, and then we were able to solve it in the new version. And we did it multiple rounds. Then they became, yeah, okay, this process is working. So let's support them. Let's do it. So yeah, it was like this. But I would also say there was a lot of language issues here. So I wish I had a Japanese speaking counterpart in this project.
Yes. There's also a fair amount of cultural effect that, prohibits
Absolutely.
people
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's where I could, as a behavioral scientist, think of the limitations brought by the culture, before we actually jump into the problem and, define the problem. So that is why it has to be curated properly.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes. So interestingly, there's one question by Ravina Gupta Kapoor. She says that, hi ma'am, if customers were to ask, how can we help you improve your life? They would ask for faster horses. So I wanted to ask, is design thinking not about problem solving? What is it about?
It is about solving the problem, and that's a very famous statement by Henry Ford that, yeah. So you don't have to ask the users what you want, because as you said that then they'll ask for a faster horses. So a lot is done by observing, because when you explicitly ask the user what they want, you're asking them to report on their behavior, or report or what is the term, recall some of their experience and talk about it, and our memories can be flawed. So it's very important what kind of user research that you are doing. And I find observing the users is the best. I don't have that image right now, but it's very funny. So what you're observing, what they're doing is very important. You could look at some analytics if it is available. Google Analytics has a lot of information on user behavior, like their dropouts rate, where the user is facing challenges. There are eye tracking studies that are amazing for user research. So yeah, you have to be very cautious what kind of a user research method you're employing so that you get to the crux of the problem, and not just looking at things from a very, from a distance.
Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Ravina. There's another question by Mr. Sagar Batra. He says that, how does one decrease the friction between cross-functional teams? So surprisingly, these are the questions that we also had in our panel yesterday in the evening, but that's about it because there's a fair amount of overlap. So let's go ahead and have your perspective as well. So how does one decrease the friction between cross-functional teams, product design and growth? Because all these different teams function on product-led growth. The thought process are different. The key functions all these teams work on are more or less the same. So
yes. It's very interesting. And also because I always work with a cross-functional team. So my team usually has a tech lead and a product manager, a project manager, a product owner from the customer team. So the idea is that, first of all, this is a myth that the user experience designer is only the person who is going to do the design work, which is not actually true. So all of the cross-functional team members are contributing for the overall user experience in different way. I contribute more for doing the proper research or coming up with the right prototypes. So that is my contribution. The tech lead would be contributing for user experience by ensuring that the application has good performance. Simple things like it doesn't take more than 2 or 3 seconds to load the page. So all these things would also contribute for the user experience. So I may be the director of this whole process, but everybody from the cross-functional team is contributing. Even the users are contributing. So when they are giving a demo how they use the application, even just talking about their day-to-day life, they are contributing for the user experience because they are telling me their problems, or they are at least showing me what problems they are facing. So as long as the entire team understands what is the outcome, what are the merits, and it is, again, that's why it's more important to define your goals and your metrics, your North Star in the beginning, so that all your team member can look at it and see, okay, this is where we are heading and this is how we can contribute. So yeah, it's not one person job. So everybody has to contribute for a good user experience.
Great. We can take up one more question. Benefer Fernandez, I hope I've taken the name right. He's asking, what is your biggest challenge in bringing about this kind of change with the employees of an organization? Many times employees are accustomed to following a certain process, and changes require an entire change in mindset as well.
Yes. I don't know if the biggest challenge, but I do work with a lot of different cultures. So I mostly work with Southeast Asian countries. So there is Thailand, Philippines. I also work for Pacific region, so also Australia, New Zealand. What I find quite challenging is that sometimes when you are trying to investigate the issue, and it happens more often when you're talking to the stakeholders or the product owner, they would try to tell you the solution, that I want this solution to be implemented. They do it with a good intention, but this is where a red flag is. This is where you have to stop and say, hey, we have not identified the root cause of the problem. Let's not jump to the solution immediately. So saying it in a nice way that your solution may or may not work is quite challenging, because I'm a consultant, and the idea is that the product owner would know their product much better. So we always try to say that, okay, let's bring a fresh perspective. Let's identify the right problem, because you don't want to spend 1 month of development time and only to realize that you're not solving the right problem. So I think that is also a very big challenge when the project team tries to force a solution, and then they want only that solution to be built. So that's quite challenging.
Great. So just pushing boundaries a bit, I'm just taking up last question. I'm skipping Chinmay Das's comment as of now, because we might as well take this Q&A opportunity and answer one last question. Chinmay, you have already pasted your comment in the chat box as well for everyone to read. So probably Smriti can have a look at it. So I'm taking last question, which is by Heram. So it says that, how do you decide the sample size of your users, company stakeholders and end users? This seemed to be a very vital question for the user review in the case study 1. Do we focus more on problem solving in the company or end users from the start of ideation stage in the design thinking process? So I believe it's a very good question. I mean, I would like to know that.
The sample size, again, that depends on what kind of research or usability. So for example, usability testing, also Nielsen Norman says 5 to 6 users would give you about 80% of the problem. And after that, you will start to see the trend. If you are doing formative study, like a focus group or something, then generally for each persona, having about 10 to 15 people is good. If you are looking at the analytics, like Google Analytics or click ratio or something like that, then if you're doing some statistical analysis, then at least 30 or above, you need people like that. So a lot depends on what you want to learn and what kind of research methods you are employing. So yeah, if it's a qualitative study, then you need a lesser number of people, but more of their time. If it is a quantitative study, then you need more people, 30 over people, and like quantitative study, like also like A/B testing or eye tracking studies and things like that. So then you need more people. So it a lot depends on what kind of research method you are employing.
So
You can just Google this and you'll find a lot and lot of information on this one, that how many people is good.
as a researcher, Smriti, I would like to add to your point that yes, the kind of research methodology answers your question about the sample size, and also that it's all about increasing data points. I mean, in the end, so either if you have more time, you get more information, that will increase data point, or you can have more participants and that will increase your data points. So even if you go horizontally or vertically, you just need to have some sufficient number of data points. And there's also with empirical studies, it's easier to answer this question where you have power analysis to answer. With previous research, you can see the power of that experiment, and if you're having a similar experiment, you can generate that amount of for that amount of power, it will give you a minimum number of sample size required. But with user research, obviously, so you can go vertically or horizontally and have sufficient data points as you choose, depending on your research methodology, and that's about it in general in research. So anyways, that has been a very interesting session, Smriti. You have actually wrapped up our quest for user research entirely in the end. So we could learn a lot from the workshop, and then now you have filled the vacant spots that were there. I thank you for your time, and on behalf of NSE, CBS, and IIMA, we thank you for being one of the resource persons at the last minute for this conference. And
thank you so much. It was very pleasurable to be speaking. I wish I could see all of you, but yeah.
In good time.